Over 3.2 million immigrants, mostly from Central America, were either arrested or turned away from the U.S. borders in 2023. Meanwhile, over 190,000 immigrants, mostly from Africa, sought illegal entry into Europe this year. 3,038 of them are either missing or dead while making the treacherous journey. Now, these staggering numbers firmly thrust the issue of immigration into the spotlight as a global crisis. And South Africa has its own fair share. Newzroom Afrika's senior politics reporter Ziyanda Ngcobo takes a look at how developed and developing nations are grappling with the global migration crisis.
Globally, millions of people make the difficult decision to leave their homelands in search of greener pastures. For some, the journey is motivated by the promise of better economic prospects. Others are often forced to flee intolerable political conditions with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Despite their reasons, their new countrymen and women hardly ever welcome them with open arms. In fact, in some instances, reception is rather hostile.
We no longer want to coexist with these people in our communities. I want to tell you, we no longer want Pakistans or any illegal immigrants.
People are tired of foreign nationals. You should see how congested our towns, our cities are. You can't even walk on pavements.
Is that not because of poor planning, though? Because, I mean, the issue of migration is not something new.
That's why we need to remove the current government and make sure that all of us are involved and make sure that this issue on its own, I tell you, Malungelo, if we deal with the migration issue, a lot of things in this country will automatically change. If we have mass deportation, that's the first thing that needs to happen. After making sure that we enforce these policies, mass deportation needs to happen, and the embassies need to also come and account for their people that are here illegally.
The politics of immigration, which are rarely pretty, reared their ugly head again during electoral campaigns across the world in 2024. South Africa wasn't immune. The past year was unprecedented in global politics. Over 60 countries held their national elections. Collectively, that means 49% of the world's population cast their ballots for new presidents, prime ministers, and national legislatures. In many of these polls, the issue of immigration was a central talking point. For Donald Trump, one of the presidential candidates in the United States, immigration served as the anchor of his bid to return to the White House.
She's not a smart person. She's a low IQ individual. She is. She's a low IQ person. Millions of Americans are suffering because of inflation. They're losing their jobs, they can't afford housing, groceries, or a car, and yet Kamala is importing millions of illegals across our borders and giving them taxpayer benefits at your expense. I will invoke the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to target and dismantle every migrant criminal network operating on American soil.
Here at home, the situation was barely different. Politicians exploited the country's genuine immigration and unemployment crises in a bid to persuade potential voters that their respective parties had the real and only solutions to these problems. Their language often reminiscent of Trump, despite him being an ocean away.
IFP will reserve job opportunities in the entry-level and low-skill sectors for South Africans only, focusing on our youth. We will reserve the small enterprise market and the spaza shops industry for the people of South Africa, including support of the local business economy, and this will effectively mean all the spaza shops in our towns occupied by foreign nationals will have to be returned to the people of South Africa in order that our economy develops and improves.
So I'm saying to you today, when we take over on the 30th of May, on the 31st or the 1st of June, all the illegal foreigners, Abba! 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 They are going home unapologetically. They are selling drugs here. They are working as cheap labor. They are not unionized. They don't pay tax. They're selling old, outdated food. They're making poisonous food in their tuck shops. They're selling us toilet water. They're making their own medicine. You that still feel they must remain here. You that still feel that we are insensitive, I've got one message for you. When they leave, you can also pack your bag and you can go with them because they are going home.
When the votes were eventually tallied, after 29 May, the EFF had lost some ground to both old and new enemies. Its leader, Julius Malema, went on to reject claims that the party's electoral setback was due to its softer, more tolerant immigration policies, particular towards fellow Africans.
Border, open border, we're supporting foreigners and all of that. Okay, if this issue is the one that has costed elections for the EFF, why didn't this issue give Mashaba votes? It's not true what you are saying. Rena problem ya rena. MK. MK took our votes which it brought to us in 2019. There's no any other explanation other than that. If this issue was a concerning issue in South Africa, Gayton Mackenzie, Mabambe with 2 seats, Mabambe. They didn't help anyone with anything. You are not going to be made to compromise a principle to please non-existing voters. Our voters understand our message very well.
But it seems Malema is not alone in his belief that foreign nationals are not the problem in South Africa.
Unfortunately, so and then business here so because people support that too much. Yes.
The issue of jobs is one thing, and perhaps foreign nationals owning spaza shops in our country's townships is another. But when nearly 30 children die from suspected food contamination, it provides an ugly spark to fan the flames of xenophobia.
The most powerful and frightening similarity I see is, ironically, fear. I think a lot of politics in South Africa is driven by fear. Fear of the other, fear of not having a job, fear of not having a home, very real fears, but they manipulated politically to sort of point the finger at certain people. In the case of South Africa, very clearly immigrants, especially migrants from elsewhere on the continent. And that kind of fear, and it's the fear that I experienced in apartheid South Africa as well, that was supported these kinds of very violent institutions and processes. I hear it more and more here. It feels like I'm in apartheid South Africa in the US right now. The way that fear is mobilized to push people to do and say things and vote for things that are not in their best interest at all, but also produce more fear, produce more violence.
Whatever the words of the politicians, the issue of migration has struck at the hearts of citizens. And that's despite the arguably more serious and pressing issues of unemployment and food insecurity. But as a country without any foreign nationals even a possibility in the modern global village the world has shrunk to?
I think it would be much better if the foreigners were not around, because that will also create job opportunities for us as South Africans. Like, I've seen that they are selling staffs that are not good for us. So if job opportunities were created for South Africans, that would be much better.
Foreign nationals ayahamba noma awekho ama-drugs ukudayiseka kwama-drugs lawa asibulalela intsha la ezweni lethu ngancipha kakhulu ngoba yibona abafika nale dakamizwa lezi.
Ngajabula kakhulu ngoba futhi lokuqala abantu bayadelela bathatha imisebenzi ngoba betshela ukuthi basebenza noma yini abanandaba any easy work they take, then bashiya labantu aba-skilled for that work bengawutholi umsebenzi. So ngajabula uma bengahamba.
South Africa has had long-standing grapples with its branch of the global migrant crisis. The stench of the 2008 and 2015 deadly xenophobic attacks on foreign nationals in Gauteng and other parts of the country still lingers in the air. In 2024, xenophobia has expressed itself through the raids and looting of foreign-owned spaza shops. These raids were sparked by the deaths of over 23 children who succumbed after eating suspected contaminated food, mostly bought at spaza shops.
Scores of people and piles of goods going home. Despite the worldwide antagonism towards migrants for taking jobs and the thorny issue of spaza shops in our case, there are more aspects. The first is that migrants don't stay in one place forever. And in the case of the US and South Africa, they've benefited immensely from skilled workers.
We need the skills, we need the investment. We don't have enough teachers, we don't have enough nurses, we don't have enough doctors. We need these skills for South Africa to prosper. We need the investment to create jobs. Does that mean we have to be open to everyone? Not necessarily, but it does mean that we need to have a discussion about how we link migration to development, to growth. Closing our borders to everyone is what England has tried to do over the last few years, coming back to that. And what we've seen is it's had disastrous economic consequences. So if South Africa's real issues are about getting people jobs, getting people services, we can't afford to be, as Mandela said, an island in a sea of desperation. We need to be connected to the rest of the continent and to the rest of the world.
It's clear that migration is inevitable. People will always travel in search of greener pastures. What countries will have to ensure is that when they do so without risking life or limb.
The interesting things as an anthropologist is that actually when globalization emerged, and I would identify someone like Bill Clinton as someone who was a big, big advocate in the 1990s of opening up borders to trade, this sort of thing, that anthropologists were moving back in the opposite direction and saying that, in fact, at the local level, people were very concerned with locality, and so we developed these concepts of global and local. And in a way predicted that where things might move was towards a sense of protectionism, of hunkering down, of thinking again about borders, national or otherwise. There are, again, some very interesting parallels between the United States and South Africa in terms of the way that people talk about immigration, emigration, migration, movement across borders or regional movement.
As if the issue of immigration wasn't enough on its own, one can now add to the mix climate change. Experts say the devastating impact of climate change will force even more people to migrate in hopes of escaping increasingly hostile weather and harsh living conditions. Governments around the world are now called upon for a little less conversation, but a whole lot more action. It's time to find solutions. For Newzroom Afrika on Channel 405, I'm Ziyanda Ngcobo in Johannesburg.